Hello there from London. So this is John from John England Tours. Welcome to a Small Worlds event. So I see there are around a dozen of you who've signed on, so thank you. And no doubt more people will be joining us as this complimentary tour progresses. But I'll just wait a minute or two because you know what tech is like. So bear with me. But for the benefit of those who've joined us already, I'm John from John England Tours. And so what I'll be showing you is a part of London that's usually quite hidden. And I'll explain. Hello, Daniel. Hello. Where are you from? So do say hello, by the way, in the chat. Tell me, where you're logging in from. It would be great to hear from you to find out. Hi.
Hi, from Switzerland.
Switzerland, so, fantastic.
Yeah, we're missing London and Britain, so it's the only chance to visit at the moment.
All right, I love Switzerland. Got some friends there. Beautiful place, beautiful.
Yeah, and we love the UK, so hope to be back soon.
Yeah, so fingers crossed. So hopefully, I could hopefully show you some sort of insight to a bit of hidden London. It's quite a historic part. I'll be showing you, Daniel, and of course everybody.
Great.
So Kevin's just said hello. Hi, Kevin. Nice to meet you. So this is very informal, okay? So it's not one of those heavy historic tours, rattling off dates and stuff. Frankly, I'm at the age where half the dates I forget anyway. But I mean, I'll obviously give you some value. There's only so much I can cover within the hour anyway. So we'll just, we'll kick off in a minute. We're just obviously getting other people, signing in. But I mean, you can see, of course, London wouldn't be complete without the red bus. So there's one. And it may surprise some of you that the bridge behind me is London Bridge. It's London Bridge. So, but I'll explain a little bit more in a minute. Nice to see some of the cruise boats out now on the River Thames. And behind me is part of the financial district of the City of London. So the good news is that you're not going to see me all the way through this tour. I will flip the camera so you get a better view. I just obviously wanted to show myself at this point and just say hello before I kick off the tour. This part, because I'm right next to the River Thames, is pretty windy, okay? So bear with me. I realize maybe the sound quality perhaps is not perfect. But once I move away from it, I'll be going through in between buildings. So that would sort of block the wind a little bit. You know us Brits, we always talk about the weather. So as you can see for yourselves, it's a bit overcast today, but dry, which is great. In fact, for a change, you'll see there's a bit of hidden humor there. We had a bit of rain over the last few days. And in fact, we're right in the cusp of the weather turning for the better. Apparently, according to the weather forecasters, we're going to get some glorious sunshine starting from today for the next few days. Okay, look, without further ado, as we say in Britain, I'm going to start the tour again. Welcome to those of you who have joined us in the last couple of minutes. I'm John from John England Tours. I am basically starting this historic London tour, District of London Bridge, and the bridge is behind me. Okay, so I'm going to flip the camera, so bear with me. Okay, so there is more of a better view, really, without me blocking your view of London Bridge. Now, of course, this isn't the original London Bridge, and many of you would have heard of the nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down, and you do not want me to chant anything during this tour. My singing is terrible. So what we have here is the umpteenth version of London Bridge. So just to give you a quick overview, because I realize it's very windy here, there was a medieval bridge, but even before the medieval London Bridge, the Romans, when they decided to visit in the 1st century for less than about 400 years. Hello, Johanna, Puerto Rico. Nice to meet you here. Welcome to the tour. So the Romans had built a number of wooden bridges, structures really, across this part of the River Thames. And for many centuries, this was the bridge that people would have to cross over to get from, you know, south to north and north to south part of London. Luciana, hi. Nice to see you, Luciana. And so really, the London Bridge rhyme really comes from that medieval bridge. And that was a structure that was here for over 6 centuries. And later on in the tour, I'll show you an illustration of the structure. Now, just a very quick story here. So in the late 1960s, the local government, the council, good morning to you. The local council, there was a Victorian version of the bridge, and that was basically not fit for purpose for the amount of traffic that was going over it. So they realized that they had to rebuild the bridge. And out of the blue, an American by the name of Robert McCullough stepped in and said, hey, I can't do American accents, so I'm not even going to try. I want to buy the bridge. And so to get to the point, he paid, so this, remember, is in the late 1960s, I believe it was 1968, and he paid $2.5 million for the Victorian version of London Bridge. He paid nearly 3 times as much for it to be dismantled and shipped to the US. And that bridge, that London Bridge, is in Arizona today, Lake Himansu, if I pronounced that correctly. Now, no historic tour of London will be complete without showing you, okay, I'm going to do this carefully, especially this part of London. Anybody recognize that structure in the background? Any Londoners here? I know you know what it is, but for those perhaps who haven't visited London, would you like to guess? Absolutely. Kevin, yes, it's the Tower of London. So that's in the background. So I'm showing you that at this point because we are headed for the other direction. So really, the Tower of London is towards the east side of London. Okay, so I'm glad you can see that. All right, so I'm going to move away from this because I realized that certainly this part to start the tour is rather blowy, rather windy. So I'm going to begin walking, which I have, of course. And the structure in front of us is one of the aspects of Southwark Cathedral, a very historic cathedral, Southwark. So this area, although we know it's London Bridge, this diocese is known as Southwark, okay, to us. Many things happening. The wind's still picking up, but of course, it's a busy place, as you can see. And I'm sure you want, you know, to see London as it is. You know, this is not staged. It's a live virtual tour. Yes, you're going to get some people tooting their horns, just a bit of traffic. But this is, of course, what you get in any busy street. But we're walking away from that bit of noise and just going around the corner. Lots of things here. There's even a market on the other side of this cathedral called Borough Market. I'll show you a little snippet of that market in a minute. But if I digress, this tour will be 2 hours long. And I promise a small while I'll keep to the hour. So here is the older part of Southwark Cathedral. And in fact, in various shapes and form, they claim that it's got 1,000 years of history. So I say that very carefully, 1,000 years of history. So I'm not certainly claiming that everything you see is 1,000 years old. The analogy I use to visitors to this part of the world is it's like buying a house or a piece of property and you develop it over the years. The difference is, of course, when you get old structures like cathedrals, it's the same principle. It's been developed. But what I wanted to show you very quickly is this sign here where it says Southwark Cathedral. And that's where they claim that basically for over 1,000 years, Christians have worshipped here. So you can see some key dates. Okay, I think it speaks for itself. So it was a convent, and in fact, it only became a cathedral just over 100 years ago. So the history of this is it was actually called derivative for over the water, but it was renamed when it became a cathedral. And you can see here very famous people, you know, well-learned people came here from Gower, Chaucer. He's obviously known for the Canterbury Tales. Gower's a poet. Shakespeare, of course. I don't think I need to really do much explaining about Shakespeare in terms of the heritage. And there'll be a slight Shakespearean theme to this tour. Messenger, Fletcher, Alien, famed for a school. And of course, I'm sure you've got your eyes on Harvard. And yes, that is John Harvard. Famed, of course, for Harvard University in America. John Harvard was baptized here. He came from Southwark. Isn't that amazing? And of course, Charles Dickens. So these are amongst, you know, of course, the people who used to live around this area. Are you finding it so far? Can somebody just confirm you can hear me okay? So I'm assured that I'm not just speaking to myself. So just ping me a message or say something. Is everybody okay? Great, thanks, Daniel. Just thought I'd just do a check, and I may do that a couple times again. So I did promise that I'll just show you a bit of Borough Market. So it's coming to lunchtime here, and this is only a small part of Borough Market. It's less busy for obvious reasons with the restrictions that are gradually being lifted here. But this is how London is. You got the old with the new. Thanks, Ralph, for the confirmation. All good, excellent. And this skyscraper right in front of us is known as the Shard. You know, so not a sharp piece of glass as, you know, a shard of glass. So hence the term, the Shard. So you've got really the new here meeting the old or vice versa. And it's very Victorian here. So what you see in terms of the railway that was put in about 150 years or so ago. But again, like I said earlier, I won't digress because otherwise I will lag behind in terms of other things to show you in this tour. Any questions so far while I go on to the next spot? Everybody okay? Have you been to London before, anyone? Or is anybody hopefully planning to come to London at some stage when international truly comes back, international travel? Let me know. Has anybody even been to this area? Be careful. If you say yes, you may have to take over the tour. Right. Yes, Daniel, you've been here. Excellent. Have you been at this part a long time ago? Okay, great. So hopefully this is a bit of a refresher. Great, Kevin, you've been here too. Nice to learn that. So you can see that, you know, people are making the most of the sunshine. And what we have here in front of us is a replica of a ship called the Golden Hind. Golden Hind. And it was famed during the Elizabethan era. So we're talking now the late 16th century to the early 17th century. And if anybody's got a Spanish heritage, South American heritage, look, you know, I mean respect, and you may want to close your ears. And like I did say, look, you know, I bring humor to my tour, so I do mean that in jest. I'm only joking, of course. We're all friends. But of course, history is history. And I realize also that history usually has a bit of propaganda with it. So yes, it still happens today, doesn't it, in the 21st century? So to get to the point, although this is a replica, this particular ship, although it's docked and it's actually being refurbished, okay, because it does usually allow visitors on board for a fee. They have parties on it, etc. But this ship has gone around the world, circumnavigated the world twice. So, you know, it was built to sail. And so, yeah, absolutely. Don't be fooled that it's just docked somewhere, you know, urban, that it was never seaworthy. It was. And the reason why it's here is it is part of our history. And I'll keep it brief. And this is when Queen Elizabeth I reigned. So she was one of the daughters of the infamous King Henry VIII. And there was a lot of angst, of course, between the Protestants and the Catholics in this country. And of course, throughout Europe, really, especially in those days. So yeah, so you're talking about the 16th, 17th century in particular. And so this ship is here, and it's one of its missions, amongst many, was to sail with Sir Francis Drake on board to basically plunder. So really, arguably, it was a bit of a pirate ship. And off the coast of Ecuador in 1579, it raided one of the Spanish fleets. Ah, okay, Rainer, you can recommend a restaurant. Excellent. Well, I've not been to this restaurant myself because I've been too busy doing tours. So nice to get that recommendation. So I'm assuming that you mean the old Thameside Inn. So do correct me if I'm wrong, if that isn't the restaurant you're referring to. But yeah, you can see the River Thames from the platform if you dine here. Yeah, so they plundered the Spanish galleon, and literally they couldn't believe what they found. And they came back heroes. They made the Queen immensely rich. They had a bit of the booty as well, the treasure, and actually more than paid off the national debt. That's quite a find. And of course, later on, which is another story altogether, it was involved in defeating the Spanish Armada with Sir Francis Drake and his merry men sailing from southwest England. But like I said, if anybody's joined us since, this is a replica. So I'm going to progress with this tour. Now, just a couple of caveats. This next bit, and I may check again that you can hear and see, it's a clearer day now. It's a busy stretch. As you can see, it does allow a bit of traffic for those who have to do deliveries, etc. And there's a fair few people around. But to get to the point, as you can see, this is a medieval alleyway. And I'll point out a couple of things in a minute. But you can see the building on the right is, of course, not medieval. It's been rebuilt. Okay, so the Pickford Wharf. But what I'm saying here is that it's going to be part of this stretch of the tour where maybe, just maybe, because these streets are narrow, being medieval. Of course, they've been repaved and cleaned up so that today we can enjoy its heritage. and walk through it and admire some of its history. So do please bear with me if maybe the video crackles up a bit, or perhaps the audio, hopefully not. But let's see how we do, shall we? So this structure here is very historic. This is the remains, or the ruins, should I say, of Winchester Palace. Winchester is a city in southern England, roughly about 100 or so miles away from London to the west. It's very historic. It was actually the capital of England during the Anglo-Saxon times. So even before the Romans founded London and named it Londinium. So this is going way back in history now. So Winchester, yes, was the capital of England. And there was a big stretch called Wessex. So really historically, that sort of kicked off various bishops of Winchester. And those bishops decided to base themselves, of course, in London over the centuries. So in the 12th century, Henry de Blois, who was the grandson of William the Conqueror. So William the Conqueror was the famous king who basically came, he was a duke in Normandy, and he came and invaded England in 1066. It's usually a date that all us, adults remember. I've been told as school children to remember. It's an easy one, really, 1066. And he would have been responsible for various buildings and castles. Of course, the famous one is the Tower of London, which I showed right at the beginning of this tour. That was obviously on the horizon. But to come back to this particular ruin, the heritage was from the 12th century, where the Bishop of Winchester will base himself here. It was a full palace. And he, in fact, had this district as what we call the Liberty. So he had complete jurisdiction of this district that we call today the Clink. So officially, this district is known as the Liberty of the Clink. So while it's clear, I'm just going to show you a bit of the heritage. And that is an illustration. Here's Winchester Palace in terms of the sign. And that is the illustration here of what that medieval hall would have looked like. Isn't that amazing? Now, every time I see this, it sort of pains me. And I'll tell you why. Because I do not just private walking tours in London, I'm also a driver guide, and I do private castle tours and to historic houses in Southeast England. And there's one special place amongst others in sunny Kent that's called Penshurst Place. Penshurst Place. You may want to look that up and see some pictures. And today it still has a 14th century medieval hall, absolutely intact and complete. In fact, it's so precious and historical that there have been a number of films filmed there over the decades in particular, like The Other Boleyn Girl, you've got Wolf Hall, so very Tudor themed films. So yes, when I do see that illustration, you think, oh no, what a loss. And what I didn't tell you was the cause of how this structure was destroyed. It was actually fire. I'm sure you would have guessed that. Nobody really knows the cause. It wasn't anything to do with the fire of London. But one theory amongst others is really, it's quite a neat theory, not for them at the time, but it's, candlelight. And that was usually the cause of these fires, really, where, of course, they didn't have electricity. But I'll stand corrected on that. That's history for you. When people don't really know things like that, there are theories that come out. Sort of reminds me what goes on in the media today. Okay, so we're going to progress on. Are you still hearing me? Can I just do a quick check before we go on to the next site? It's a pretty clear day. Fantastic. Thanks, Raina. Excellent. Thank you, ASW. That's great news. And what I love about London, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, is where, again, you know, how things sort of line up. Well, they don't really line up, actually. Sometimes it's a mishmash. And what is it today? All the vehicles are out. This is quite unusual. But anyway, maybe it's delivery hour or something. But you've got, you know, modern cafes, you know, right next to a historical site. Isn't that wonderful? The adjacencies, it's just amazing. And of course, like I said earlier, you know, this is important just to use one's imagination of what this place would have been like during the medieval times. Yeah. So of course, you know, even down to the paving, that of course is not, you know, original cobble or cobblestone. Okay. Of course, things move on, you know, the health and safety people will of course set themselves in to make sure that people don't trip up. And of course, these things in some areas of London have to be repaved because in fact, you know, there are apartments here. This is just looking back. So you can see it's more modern, particularly on the left. Now, here is another piece of history, hence the name of my virtual tour. And how about this for a bit of ambience? Can you hear that? Right, so what is this about? So, welcome to the outside of the Clink Prison Museum. Absolutely. Now, this is not made up. This site was a medieval prison. And for those of you who've been to London before, we like our blue plaques. So here's one to either remind people or educate people if they're sort of like, you know, walking around, that this is a historic, very important site, the Clink. So 1144, as you can see, to 1780. So for centuries, this was a medieval prison. And just to keep it brief, the various bishops of Winchester would have had a hand at this, to say the least. So bearing in mind that earlier I said that this is known as the Liberty of the King, and the bishops of Winchester, obviously there's only one bishop at a time, but over the years and centuries there'll be various bishops. They had jurisdiction over this area. And yes, they would have had a cut from things like the jailers who were poorly paid, to those who committed perhaps petty crime. For example, depending on the original crime, if it wasn't too serious, hence the pettiness, they were allowed out from time to time and perhaps earn a bit of money on the side, but there was a catch. They would have to pay, in modern terms, commission to the bishop. So yeah, that's how the various bishops ruled this place, really. It's not just about religion, it was about money as well. Now, often when I take my guests who visit this part of town and various places, they'll want to know the backstory in terms of what happened here. Yes, there are various stories that derive out of here. There was something called the Peasants' Revolt. So there was actually a riot here in the Middle Ages. So this prison, not for the first time, was stormed. There were various characters in the prison of jailed for perhaps, well, in those days, more serious crime like heresy. So that was a very serious crime in those days. For the North Americans amongst you, the founding fathers and mothers of America, New England, some of those people, of course, a lot of them were Puritans, but some of them were even jailed here. And those who survived and got out were amongst the first to actually land in New England. And if history denotes me right, I believe particularly New Plymouth, okay, amongst other places, because they would have gone to Plymouth in southwest England, of course, which is in Devon. What I wanted to show you here is just an illustration, okay, of medieval London. So for the benefit of those who perhaps didn't join us at the start of this virtual tour, I showed the modern version, because it's been various, of London Bridge. Right, okay, there's a bit of background noise. Somebody's doing a bit of construction. So what I wanted to show you was the illustration of what that medieval bridge, London Bridge, looked like. Can you see that? I'm just going to hold this still. And in fact, deliberately, while this background noise is going off, I'm going to give you a bit of time to read this. So Bankside hasn't changed much since the Clink days, and I'm sure you can read the rest. Because one thing I've learned about doing these live virtual tours is when there's a lot of noise, don't try and fight it. I'll just be adding to the noise. Right, so we'll finish off this visit outside. With that bit of medieval music. That gives you a bit of ambience. Right, I hope that was informative for you. So yes, this in particular is called Clink Street. And I'm surprised none of you have asked me yet. Why the Clink? Is the usual question. Why is it called the Clink? And perhaps some of you have already guessed that. And yes, the obvious theory is the noise of chains. Another theory is more specific, where no, it's the bolting of the doors. Another one I've heard is there's a Flemish term which I won't try and pronounce, but very similar to today's English expression, the clink, and it sounds very similar. And so I'll let you decide perhaps which of those three you think that's the term the clink came from. Now, here's another angle to this tour. And of course, I mentioned the bard, William Shakespeare. So here is a mural of the bard himself. And for those, again, who perhaps joined us a few minutes into this live tour, okay, I'm not going to around. What did I say about the live tour? I'm going to get some more. So what I'm going to do is show you a special place. Usually, people who visit this area, if they're going in this direction, they will turn right and go along what's called Bankside along the River Thames, and vice versa. There's nothing wrong with that because that's the main spot, that's the main trail, if you like. Well, what I'm going to show you is a little hidden place that a lot of visitors miss when they come to this area. And I would be doing the bard, William Shakespeare, a disservice in 2021 if I didn't show you this special place. So do bear with me, because where I'm going is literally, if you like, in inverted commas, behind the scenes. So as you can see, this is a residential area. And the beauty of doing a virtual tour is I don't have a group of people. So even though I do private tours, you know, my walking tours can have up to 8 people. And I have to respect that this is a residential area. So I wouldn't be especially popular if I keep, you know, bringing people here. But the very fact that I'm on my smartphone doing a live tour ensures a bit of privacy for them. So I'm not taking literally people with me. So you're going to perhaps have a bit of background noise, okay? Hopefully the people constructing this building are on the break at the moment. But hopefully this is worth it for you. So do please bear with me. Now, a lot of you will have heard of the Globe Theatre. This is the site of the original Globe Theatre at this part of town. Now, I caveat this part of town, and I'll cover that in a minute. So what we have here, just bear with me, is an illustration, again, of what medieval London used to look like. So literally, that is the, at the time anyway, the medieval version of St. Mary Overy, now known as Southwark Cathedral, right in the middle of your screen. So the right of it is the medieval London Bridge. Can you see how there are literally buildings on it? Amazing that it's survived for over 6 centuries, what with that weight. So that was the main thoroughfare to cross the River Thames. Today, we have approximately 33 bridges. And there would be the medieval St. Paul's Cathedral, the medieval St. Paul's Cathedral, which unfortunately burnt down during the fire of London in 1666. But this is the original site of the Globe Theatre. So where you see, it says the Globe, underneath it are the original foundations, the ruins of the Globe Theatre over here in the district of Southwark. Now, this was actually lost for many years. There was no record of where, I know it sounds absolutely astounding, until basically roughly about 35, 40 years ago, when you know, builders were digging up, they found some ruins. And so the London archaeologists got involved. And as you can see here, all right, there's some visuals about what they found, some coins. Okay, and just to give you a quick view, all right, at what's underneath. So although it's been paved over, the experts can still access it, okay, for research purposes, but this is now private land, but it's still a historical site. Now, I know sometimes when you see images like that, it's very difficult to visualize, isn't it? Would you agree with me? I mean, I'm certainly, I've booked tour guides in the past when my family and I have traveled around the world. And when people just share stories, of course, you're reliant on your imagination. Now, I want you to help me with that in terms of how this area looks during Shakespeare's time. That was the 18th century, early 17th century. I just want to show you a visual or two of what these theatres used to look like. So this is a picture or artist's impression based on research by Leicester University of what Bankside used to look like. So I'm going to ask you to read again, because I'm not going to fight the wind and the noise of the construction. Okay. Houses were based here. So there's actually the road which competed with the globe. You see how green and very country-like it was? Isn't that amazing? Can you see that? Can I just do a check? I know the sound was pretty noisy, but I'll be out of here soon. Okay, very country. Did somebody just ping me a message? This is just to check that I'm still live with you and not talking to myself. The interior of the rose. Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, I thought the sound would be bad, Daniel, but I'll be out of here soon. It'll improve. So thank you to you and all of you just to bear with me, but hopefully this is worth it. So when as a tour guide, you know, some of us get frustrated about, you know, phrases like off the beaten track and hidden gems. So, you know, I hope you'll understand that sometimes we have to take diversions to show you something a little bit special that many people would miss. And whether we call that off the beaten track or not, hopefully you'll understand why I did this, because without preempting too much, there'll be a little bit more of the heritage and what the likes of William Shakespeare got up to. Ago, when I caveated that the site that I showed you, where the archaeologists had discovered a few years ago the remains of the Globe Theatre, I said, this is where the original Globe Theatre was, in this area, or was to that effect. So I'm being very particular, because the story there is really, very briefly, while I walk around the block here, is William Shakespeare, he was a partner with some others. They actually had a theatre in Shoreditch, so that's the east side of London, and they were very happy with it. But unfortunately, they fell out with the landlord. And in fact, when the landlord then took a break and was away, naughty William Shakespeare and his partners decided, right, we're off. So literally, they dismantled bits of that theatre and brought it over to this part of London, Southwark, to basically rebuild the Globe. It wasn't called the Globe Theatre when it was in Shoreditch. It was actually called the Theatre. So I guess they got a little bit more creative and called it the Globe. Yeah, so just a bit of background. So that was actually rebuilt, even though a lot of people, of course, call it the original Globe. If I was going to be extra pedantic, the original one was called the Theatre in Shoreditch. Now, this area is, again, new meets old. So a lot of people are out and about as we get some of our freedoms back. It's lunchtime here in London, and this is a historic pub. It was originally built in 1615. So how about that? Now, again, I'm not claiming that everything you see is just over 400 years old. It would have been expanded over the centuries, but certainly the anchor in various shapes and forms was sited here, place of refreshment. Now, talking about refreshment, it'll be remiss of me not to share you the following as I walk along Bankside. And of course, fish and chips. So if you're coming to London, you may want to try and check this place out. You get a bit of history and you get the traditional fish and chips. Anybody sampled the fish and chips? And if so, I asked, how was it? So all this area that we just went through particularly, so I'm looking back now. Right, Bankside, Raina, thank you. So this area that we just walked through, the medieval part, the Liberty of the Clink, there was a lot of debauchery. So there was prostitution, to get to the point. And it was actually arguably licensed. Would you believe that? And yes, presided over by the various bishops of Winchester, who frankly should have known better. And of course, they took their financial cut. And in fact, the prostitutes were known and are known today when we look back as the Winchester geese. Right, so we're going to continue this tour. Anybody who would like to guess what that is in the right-hand side in the background, that dome? Let me know. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to show you St. Paul's. That's right, Luciana, thank you, St. Paul's. You'll get a better view of that in a few minutes' time. What's in front of us is a Victorian bridge, and that would be Southwark Bridge over the River Thames. And this particular bridge here is a construction, it's a railway bridge to the main financial district, and basically it's Cannon Street. You can see some skyscrapers. And in the background, you'll see more skyscrapers in the far side. That's more to the east. So that's what we call Docklands. What's really confusing, just to explain, we actually call this the city, okay? And it depends in what context. So if and when you do visit London and you hear Londoners say, oh, are you going to the city? The obvious thing is to think, well, yeah, I mean, London is a city, right? Okay. Well, more specifically, depending again on the context, if they're talking about the city in terms of this area, they're literally talking about the city, the historic city of London, part of which you can see right in front of you. And of course, we have the financial districts, and we also know that it's the square mile. I hope that's something some of you perhaps have just learned. And yes, you can see the walkie-talkie. Absolutely, Raina. So that will be to the right of the cluster of skyscrapers, where it's slightly concave. And in fact, there's a sky garden up there. So when international travel comes back, if you're visiting London, by all means, you can go up there. Even before the pandemic, you would have to book because of the various lifts and the limit on capacity. So you'll have to book online. But actually, it's free. Fantastic view of London from the Sky Garden. So what we're doing here is we're going and progressing along Bankside. We're just going through this little archway. And again, you'll see that it's old meets new. So of course, you know, this is quite a trendy hangout now. There's busking going on. Pizza and pasta. And you've got some Italian music in the background. So for any of you, I believe that's Italian anyway, from there or connected to Italy. All credit to you, by the way, on the, I mentioned it, the football. A lot of us paid into that result, but Congratulations to you on that, by the way. So here now we're at the other side of Southwark Bridge. And you'll see that the buildings really do differentiate, don't they? Okay, on the north side particularly, right? So anybody who would like to guess why, the buildings are like that? There's no one particular theme necessarily in terms of architecture, particularly in the north side of the river. There's a clue there. And another clue is I did mention something significant that happened a few centuries ago, well, in the 17th century. So anybody like to guess why, we have such a eclectic mix of buildings, modern, old, skyscrapers. There's no one set theme. You couldn't say it's all Victorian. You couldn't say it's all medieval. No? Anybody who would like to have a go? Don't be shy.
Yeah.
That's right, Daniel. Great Fire. So the Great Fire of London in 1666 destroyed much of the city of London. So I've explained what the city is in terms of district or area of London in that sort of context. And there were a lot of medieval buildings very close up to each other. And of course, built of timber. And in the heart of the city, the story goes that it actually started in Pudding Lane in a bakery. Of course, the owner of that bakery never owned up to it. Who would? And it destroyed practically all of this area of London, not helped by the fact that when the fire started, there was a very strong easterly wind, which just fanned the fire. And of course, in the background is St. Paul's Cathedral. So you won't today get any skyscrapers around this part because that will just hide the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral. So I would have showed you the medieval illustration of St. Paul's Cathedral. It's very historic, very historic. Lots of kings and queens. Of course, you've got Westminster Abbey, which is in Westminster, London, towards the west of London, not at the west of London, but towards, so shall I say, westward. And so that would be a place of coronations and some royal weddings. But of course, some major events, certainly in the 20th and 21st century, still take place here at St. Paul's. So namely, Lady Diana and Prince Charles were married at this cathedral. So this version of St. Paul's Cathedral is roughly about 350 years old. And in fact, a bit of fact for you that I'll throw in, it's the first cathedral in Britain that was built that wasn't Catholic, so Protestant. And of course, that's thanks to King Henry VIII. There's lots of stories actually, yes, to do with St. Paul's. Depends, which story is being referred to. But of course, there's medieval history there. There's of course World War II. So, when the Londoners rebuilt this part of London, the city, then we had World War II and we had the Blitz. And a lot of this area was destroyed yet again by the Luftwaffe. But the amazing thing, and it's quite spiritual really, is St. Paul's Cathedral survived it. I can tell you, most of the buildings around St. Paul's Cathedral was destroyed. There's a whole new square behind our view here, behind it, called Panoramic Square, and that's all rebuilt. Okay, so I told you about the Shakespearean theme here. And so what we have here are two lovely buildings. So what we have here is Shakespeare's Globe. So that would be a reconstruction. And you see that it's got a very sort of like Elizabethan, Queen Elizabeth I, that is, Elizabethan theme to it. So we've got a pub, restaurant in there. There's also a playhouse, a modern playhouse behind it that predominantly will be used in the winter. And next to it is a replica of the Globe Theatre. So where I show you the rooms of the Globe Theatre, so here you've got Shakespeare's Globe. So this was built in the late 1990s as a reconstruction. Very popular. And of course you get plays, mostly of course, Shakespearean plays, King Henry V, The Tempest, Macbeth, so on and so forth. But there are other themes sometimes. And you can see it's got a thatched roof. And in fact, this is the only thatched roof that's allowed in the whole of London. And you can probably guess why. And that is because it's a health and safety. It's potentially a fire hazard. And in fact, there's a bit of history construction here that we see right in front of us. But when Shakespeare and his merry men recited their theatre and called it the Globe, where I showed you the ruin, a few years later actually caught alight. There was some theatre type cannon fire for effect. So cannon shots used during a live play, and some of it hit the roof and the whole thing went up in flames. So they literally had to rebuild on the site they relocated the original theatre to. So it really shows you their determination, you know, way back in the Elizabethan times of theatre. Sadly, though, in roughly about the middle of the 17th century, not just the liberty of Clink, but theatre and all that debauchery and the prostitution, the government as well. The theatre's down. So a few years later, where I showed you the original site for the Globe Theatre in this part of London, you know, where they rebuilt it after that fire, they had to close it. So plays for a few years were made illegal. Would you believe it? And you see what goes with it is things like bear baiting. So literally there were fights placed between animals, bears. But today you can see that people enjoy its heritage with this wonderful reconstruction. And they do, of course, their own tours here. You know, so whether or not you're interested in the place, if you, let's say, are time bound and you just want just an overview, there is an opportunity to book a tour. And of course, I need to give credit to the actor, Sam Wanamaker. Okay, so he basically started the whole process of ensuring that the heritage still remains and people enjoy Shakespeare's Globe. And I just want to show you a visual of what it looks like inside today. Can you see that in the poster? So we're now in the last couple of minutes of this virtual tour. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative. And for those of you who have yet to come and visit London, or perhaps those of you who've been to London but haven't visited this part, just to say that you can reach it by going to the London Bridge area, and the district is Southwark. St. Paul's Cathedral. This is the Millennium Bridge. It's a pedestrianised bridge. Okay, Ralph, thanks for listening in. I'm going to say goodbye to you, Ralph. Thank you. And we know this locally as the Wobbly Bridge. There's not enough time to tell you the whole story of it, but certainly when it was put up, it wobbled too much. So the architects have to step in and strengthen it. It's probably the most secure pedestrian bridge on the planet. And to the left is the Tate Modern. Okay, and the chimney sort of gives it away. It was formerly a power station. So I hope that was useful. I hope you enjoyed the tour. I'm John from John England Tours. What I do is I deliver private walking tours in London, and I'm also fully insured private driver guide, and I take visitors to historic places, namely castles and historic houses in Southeast England. The links to my web presence, Facebook, Instagram, with the events page that was put together by A Small World. And I'd like to thank A Small World for helping curate this and organize it. So thank you, Stephanie. Thanks everyone for listening in, tuning in, and for your interaction. And so I'm going to sign off and say goodbye. Bye, Kevin. Bye, Elena. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you. Keep in touch. And if you come to London, by all means, happy to help. Bye, Johanna. Michelle, bye-bye. I'm glad you found it interesting. It's been a pleasure. Juan, thank you. Thanks for all your interaction, and especially when I had to check in to make sure the sound was still working and things. So look, I'm going to say cheerio from London. And if you have any questions, bye, Luciana. If you've got any questions even further down the line, whatever, next few hours, I believe A Small World started the chat. So by all means, post a question if I can help. So Martin, you're very welcome. Okay, so I'm signing off now. Enjoy the rest of your day, no matter what time it is. And for those who are viewing a recording of this, thank you. And of course, keep in touch. Bye-bye.